standard is the standard. This is how you win the NFC North. Shout out to Eileen McNeil, baby.
Yeah, I wanted to explain it, but I couldn't tell you in words how it feels.
Folks, buckle up because the NFL money machine just kicked into overdrive, and it happened before most of us had even poured our first cup of coffee. While the sports world was busy debating training camp battles and preseason storylines, a bombshell dropped out of Atlanta that instantly rerouted every single conversation happening in Allen Park. And when I say instantly, I mean it. This is one of those stories where you can practically hear the phones buzzing across NFL front offices in real time. So let's get into it, because this is the domino that changes everything for the Detroit Lions. Here's what went down. Bijan Robinson, the electric two-time Pro Bowl running back for the Atlanta Falcons, just reset the entire running back market. The Falcons and Robinson agreed to a 3-year extension worth up to $75 million, a deal that instantly makes him the highest-paid running back in the history of the National Football League. We're talking $51 million guaranteed, with $37 million of that landing in his pocket immediately at signing. The base value of this deal sits at $22.25 million per year, which already blows past the $21 million ceiling most analysts were predicting just weeks ago. This is a record-breaking, market-shattering, jaw-on-the-floor kind of contract, and it did not take long for it to become the biggest story in Detroit, even though Robinson doesn't play a single snap for the Lions. So why in the world are we talking about a Falcons running back on a Lions channel? Because this contract lit the fuse on a bomb that has been sitting in Detroit for months. Jahmyr Gibbs, the electric, game-breaking, human highlight reel that Lions fans have watched torch opposing defenses for 3 seasons now, is entering the final year of his rookie deal, and everybody in the building knows he deserves to get paid. The two situations have been tied together all offseason. Whoever signed their extension first would set the market, and the next guy in line would cash an even bigger check. That is exactly how this league works, and Lions fans have actually seen it play out before in their own favor. Remember when Amon-Ra St. Brown signed his extension at $30 million a year, and everyone thought the Cowboys would blow past it for CeeDee Lamb? They dragged their feet for months before Lamb finally landed at $35 million. Patience paid off then. But this time, Detroit isn't the team that got to set the number. Atlanta beat them to it, and now the pressure is squarely on the Lions to match or exceed what the Falcons just did for Robinson. Let's talk about what matching actually looks like, because the numbers here are staggering. If Robinson's deal can reach $75 million with incentives, you could realistically see Gibbs land a contract that pushes toward $80 million over 3 years. That is a mind-bending number for a position that the league has historically undervalued, but running backs like Gibbs have forced teams to rethink the calculus. The real question Detroit has to answer isn't whether Gibbs deserves elite money. Everyone already agrees on that. The real question is how much of it should be guaranteed on day one, because that guaranteed money is the number that actually matters when a running back's body is on the line. Robinson got $51 million guaranteed. If the Lions want to keep pace and keep Gibbs motivated rather than resentful, they're going to need to get somewhere in that neighborhood or close to it, with a hefty chunk landing immediately at signing rather than stretched out over the life of the deal. Here's the tension, though, and it's worth sitting with for a second. Paying a running back top of market money is one of the most polarizing decisions in modern football. You are essentially betting tens of millions of dollars on a position where the shelf life is shorter than almost any other spot on the roster. Detroit is not just signing Gibbs for the next contract year. Because he still has 2 years remaining on his current rookie deal, this extension effectively locks the Lions into paying him for the next 5 seasons. 5 years of hoping he stays healthy. 5 years of hoping the tread on those tires doesn't wear down too fast. That is the gamble every team takes when they hand a running back this kind of money, and it's exactly why some fans get nervous watching numbers like this get thrown around. But then you have to ask the follow-up question, and this is where things get spicy. Would you rather commit that kind of money to Jahmyr Gibbs, or would you rather spend it on literally anyone else on this roster? Ask that question to any diehard Lions fan and watch how fast the answer comes back. Would you pay Gibbs over Brian Branch? Gibbs, no hesitation. Would you pay Gibbs over Sam Laporta? Gibbs again without blinking. These are two players who are also approaching extension territory in Detroit, and yet when you stack them next to Gibbs, there isn't even a debate. That tells you everything about how special this kid actually is. And let's be honest with ourselves for a second. How many of us would have picked Jack Campbell over Gibbs a year ago? The Lions already committed real money to Campbell, to Allen McNeil, to Aiden Hutchinson, to DJ Reed, to Derek Barnes. Nobody can say Brad Holmes has neglected the defensive side of the roster. But there comes a point where you have a generational talent sitting in your own building, and you simply cannot let him walk or let him fester in a contract dispute out of stubbornness. And here's the twist that makes this whole situation even juicier. Detroit basically built this collision course themselves. Back in the offseason, Dan Campbell openly called Gibbs a bell cow back, publicly signaling that the offense was going to run through him even more heavily in 2026. At the same time, Brad Holmes traded away David Montgomery, the physical, punishing complement back who had shared touches with Gibbs for 2 seasons. Detroit then brought in Caleb Johnson and leaned on Shaun Vakey Campbell to soak up whatever change of pace work remained. Take a step back and look at what that combination did. It told Jahmyr Gibbs, in no uncertain terms, that he is the engine of this offense with no real competition behind him. David Montgomery was a legitimately good starting running back in this league, arguably a top 15 or even top 10 back on a given Sunday, but he was never in the same tier as Gibbs. Once Montgomery was gone, the runway was cleared, and Gibbs knew it. He knew there was nobody left in that running back room who could make the Lions think twice about paying him. Would Gibbs have pushed for this deal regardless? Almost certainly yes. But Detroit's own offseason moves poured gasoline directly onto this fire, and now they're the ones standing in the smoke. Multiple insiders have already weighed in on just how urgently this needs to get resolved. Reports out of Allen Park indicate that Gibbs has been holding in during training camp, present at meetings, and even occasionally on the sideline watching practice, but not participating on the field while these negotiations play out. He's dealing with what's being described as a minor back issue, but make no mistake, the elephant in the room is the contract, not the injury. National voices have been sounding the alarm as well, with prominent NFL commentators publicly urging Detroit to get this handled before it becomes a full-blown holdout saga that bleeds into the regular season. Even Dan Campbell himself acknowledged that Bijan Robinson's record deal only adds pressure and clarity to what Gibbs camp is asking for. The mood in Detroit right now is less if and more how soon, which, frankly, is exactly where a franchise wants to be when their franchise back is the one asking for the check. Now let's pivot, because while the money conversation dominates the headlines, there's a fascinating little subplot happening down in the receiver room that deserves just as much attention, especially if you're the type of fan who loves digging into the roster bubble battles. Just a short time ago, the assumption around Detroit's wide receiver depth chart was that a young, promising second-year player named Dominic Lovett had a real inside track to claim one of the final roster spots. He was the guy fans were rooting for, the young talent with untapped upside. But training camp has a funny way of flipping scripts, and that is precisely what has happened here. A veteran wide receiver who spent this past offseason signing with Detroit after stops in Dallas, New Orleans, and Miami has completely stolen the spotlight, and it isn't particularly close anymore. Insiders tracking the position battle through an ongoing weekly poll of beat writers watched the numbers swing dramatically in a single week. Just 7 days earlier, opinion was split evenly, with about half the voters believing the veteran would make the roster and half believing the younger receiver would claim the spot. Fast forward 1 week of padded practices, and that split has become an overwhelming landslide in the veteran's favor, with all but a single voter now convinced he has locked up his roster spot. That is not a subtle shift. That is a receiver room getting rocked on its axis in the span of a handful of practices. And Dan Campbell himself has been fueling this shift with glowing, unprompted praise. He described this veteran using words that coaches reserve for players they trust implicitly, calling him a true pro who simply gets it, who understands how to carry himself, who isn't entitled, and who just shows up and works. Campbell even went out of his way to highlight the receiver's special teams contributions, noting that his tape backs up everything the coaching staff has seen on the practice field. When a head coach starts unprompted praising a fringe roster player's football character and special teams value in the same breath, that is usually a very strong signal about who's making the final 53. Here's the thing about this veteran that makes him such a fascinating story. He has never been a gaudy, stat-stuffing receiver at any stop in his career. His career-high season for catches barely cracks the mid-40s, and that came years ago during his time in Dallas. He has bounced through several organizations without ever piling up huge target shares or eye-popping numbers. But dig into the details, and you start to understand exactly why coaches keep valuing him anyway. Quarterbacks who throw his way complete passes at an extremely high rate. His route running grades out well across advanced charting services. He blocks well as a receiver, which matters enormously in a run-heavy, physical offense like Detroit's. and at a solid size that allows him to line up outside or kick inside to the slot when needed, he brings the kind of positional flexibility that coaching staffs love to have stashed on the back end of a roster. He isn't the burner who's going to blow the top off a defense, but he runs a very respectable time in the 40, faster than some of the possession-type receivers Detroit has trotted out at that same spot in recent seasons. The lesson in all of this, for anyone who follows roster construction closely, is that not every valuable roster spot needs to go to the player with the highest ceiling. Sometimes a team needs a low-floor, high-reliability veteran who can be trusted to do his job correctly if an injury forces him into action, rather than a boom-or-bust developmental prospect who might need another full season to find his footing. That appears to be exactly the calculation Dan Campbell and this coaching staff are making right now, and it is squeezing a promising young receiver further down the depth chart than almost anyone expected heading into camp. So here we are, with two massive storylines colliding in Allen Park at the exact same time. A financial reckoning at running back that could reshape the franchise's cap sheet for the next half-decade, and a quiet but decisive shakeup at the bottom of the wide receiver room that's already reshuffling who makes the final roster. Both stories prove the same larger point about this Lions organization heading into 2026. Every single roster decision, from the biggest contract in franchise history down to the 5th or 6th receiver on the depth chart, is being made with intention, with urgency, and with an eye toward building a team that can finally break through and win it all. We'll be tracking every twist in the Gibbs negotiation and every shakeup on this roster bubble as training camp rolls forward. So make sure you are locked in for all of it. If this breakdown kept you informed and entertained, do us a massive favor here at Detroit Scope. We are closing in on 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you hitting that subscribe button gets us that much closer. So smash that subscribe, drop a comment telling us whether you'd pay Gibbs, whatever it takes, and hit that like button before you go. We'll see you on the next one. Go Lions!